What's up, everybody? Welcome back to Assisted Living Investing. On this show, I want to talk to you about buying land. How much land should you buy? And there's actually too much land, right? You can buy too much and you could potentially do a deal that's too big for you. So I want to unpack some of these things because I really think it goes back to financing most of the time here, right? The bank financing and investor financing. And there's kind of a right-sized deal for you in your current financial and experience position. And then there's deals that might be a stretch and may actually be a disadvantage to you. It may be something that you're not ready for yet. And if you don't know that up front, you might buy a piece of land that requires a different deal structure than you want. You may end up having less equity and less cash flow and still doing 2 to 4 times the amount of work than you thought because you got into a deal that was too big for you at the moment. So for context here, I review all the deals that our partners have around the country, and I look at all the numbers, I look at all the site stuff, and really there's kind of 2 components here that may make a deal too big. It's not necessarily about the actual volume of land, right? How many acres it is. It's more about what is the cost of the land, and second to that, what is the cost of the site work? Because those 2 things together can put you in multiple millions of dollars. And if you're building just one mansion, you have 1 to 2 acres, man, that can be very, very limited. Sometimes you can buy land where all the utilities are there and you just have to connect to them at the street, no big deal. Sometimes you got to spend over $1 million. My project was 1.8 million on the site work, and I had no utilities. I had this huge road that I brought in. I had to bring in all this tank and pump and well and all these bioretention ponds and all these things, all right? And I did all of my site work for my whole neighborhood of 4 buildings. And that was just what I had to do based on my permits and my site layout. And sometimes those kind of things, right? The cost of land and then excessive site work, because you're not just building the site work for one, sometimes you have to go and do the whole site work for the entire project. Man, right there, those kind of things can really push a deal up and make it not a right-sized deal for you. So then the question is, what is the right-sized deal for you? And that really is a personal decision for everyone to make on their own. But if I had a magic wand, I would say if you can buy 3 acres and put 2 mansions on it, it would be sprawling, it would be gorgeous, it would be high-end, it would be perfect. And I actually think that running 2 mansions is easier by a pretty good amount than running 1. And it's all because of staffing. When you have a building right next door, and I do think this is different than having it 10 minutes away or the next city over. If you literally have it right next door and you can share staff, you can have a floater, you can have overflow, you can have a manager jump back and forth between 2 buildings. One of your chefs can call in sick and one can run, making food for both buildings. It makes everything substantially easier. Not to mention just when you are running 1 building, the way staffing works out, you just don't have enough bodies when someone calls in sick to be able to fill in those extra shifts. So if you could build 2, fantastic. I think that is the best. It may still not be, let's build 2 up front because of the financing, and we'll talk about here in a minute. But you could still come in, build 1, wait, 2-3 years, use the equity from the second one, use the equity from the first one to fund the second one. And a lot of times not need any additional capital to build. The bank will fund 100% sometimes for SBA if you have the right experience and you have equity. So that's what I would say, right? Like that's my magic wand. But what does it look like for some people? Because sometimes I review these deals and they're looking at 10 acres and they have to put in all the utilities. And it's like, man, I don't know if this is in your best interest right now because you may not have the wherewithal to be able to financially do it. And, maybe you just don't have the experience to do a big deal like this yet, right? Maybe you just wait a couple more years, get 1 mansion under your belt, and then come back and tackle a neighborhood like this. So let's talk about whether or not you can do a big deal, right? Financially speaking. And I'll break this into 2 sides. There's the lending side, the money you get from the bank, and then there's the investor side if you need the investor. So from the bank side, I really like to do SBA. I like an SBA 7A. They will lend up to $5 million on a project. They can go above that with a pari passu loan up to $7.5 million. but they will lend 80, 90% of your deal. And I referenced earlier, sometimes they'll lend 100% of the project if you have experience you're building, like kind of expanding in the same market. But commonly you'll need 10, 15, 20% down, which may be 300, 450 grand, 600 grand, right? Depending on what you're looking at here. So if you're building one mansion and you don't have to put in a huge site work budget, then man, we've seen teams come in with $300,000 down, $400,000 down. You don't need a huge amount and it's pretty achievable. But there is a couple things that are important to consider as you're looking at these things. Really, the bank is looking at you because you're going to need the operator. The bank considers this, especially if you're doing SBA, it's a small business loan, right? So you're running a business. It's not an investment. You're not going and building these and renting them and can scale that across the country. That's kind of an investment thing here. We are looking at a business, and so it is super important who is the operator, who is the person, the team that's running the operations company. Because if you can't fill the beds, if your staffing sucks and you can't perform, then all of a sudden you start losing money and then you can't make the payment to the bank, and it's kind of a domino effect. So most importantly is your experience. And the bank is looking at what type of experience do you have, whether it is medical experience. I think that's very strong. A lot of banks look for that kind of stuff. You don't have to have run an assisted living before, but if you are a nurse, a doctor, PT, OT, some kind of medical experience in that way, there's a lot of value there. The other experience is business. What type of business experience do you have? And I've talked to multiple banks that we've used with our partners, and one of our preferred lenders prefers business experience. They want you running a company. They want you taking care of the admin stuff, running payroll, managing cash flow, that kind of stuff. Another preferred lender that we use, they prioritize the medical side. So either of these, you may not need both of them, right? You may not have a team with, that's a nurse and a business person. Sometimes we do. Sometimes we partner with those kind of people. But usually if you can get one of those two sides there, and the really important thing is you look good on paper. You have to be able to qualify for this loan. It's going to be a $2.5, $3 million loan if you're going to build one mansion. And you don't have to have, $3 million in equity, but the bank does want to see that you have some kind of assets. Do you own your house? Do you have rental properties? Do you have other investments? Really, I would say they're going to look at your personal financial statement. Right? And I think that is really important, that you look good as you're writing out, oh, here's all my liabilities, here's all my assets, where do I end up? What does my income look like? Do I have a steady job? Have I had consistency over the last few years? What does my credit look like? You don't have to have like all-star 800 plus credit, but you should not have bad credit, right? Like at least goodish kind of credit. That's for you, your spouse, or whoever's on your team. And then liquidity. They want to know that you're not putting your last dollar into the deal, right? There is delays. Things go wrong. Life is not smooth and easy. So they want to know how many months of mortgage payments, how much capital do you have sitting in the bank, even after you've made your down payment money. They want to know that you still have a reserve amount in the bank. So where this can get a little tricky is if you start doing a bigger project and like, for example, Laura and I, we were going to build out one mansion. We were looking at this piece of land. We were talking to banks. We had all the experience. We had equity from Mesa, and they're like, cool, yeah, no big deal. You can do this. But that project didn't work out. We ended up buying a different piece of land. It was 7.6 acres, and we developed this neighborhood of 4 mansions on it. We went back to the bank. They're like, no, Brett, no, you need somebody else to come on with you because our balance sheet was not strong enough to take on that much debt. And so this is a really important consideration as you are talking to banks. What limit are you having that you are good at, right? Before you have to bring on somebody else to personally guarantee. And I'll talk about that in just a second here. So there really are limits on the banking side for what you are looking like, your experience, your team, and your financial position. But there's also limits on the deal structure. How much will the banks lend? And I mentioned earlier, SBA, they'll lend up to $5 million on the deal. And some banks can go above that. They can do the pari passu kind of loan and go up to $7.5 million. Our loan was, I want to say 7.2 million between the SBA and the pari passu. So it is possible to go above these limits, but that may not be applicable to everyone. And you may have to look at a different loan product. You may be looking at a 504 loan, and that drastically can change the amount of capital that you need coming into the deal. It's not just about the down payment, but it's also the working capital, which is why SBA I think is awesome for this, because they will provide so much working capital, FF&E, all the reserves, safety net, all of that kind of stuff, where some other loan products won't do that. They'll just lend on the real estate, not on the business side. Or you might get to a place where, you know what, none of these loan products work and the best deal structure is syndication. You might be able to get the deal done that way, but what does that do to your equity position and your cash flow? You might have come in thinking, hey, you know what, I'm looking for land, I'm gonna build one mansion, we're running our pro forma, we're gonna make, even after investor partners, we're gonna make $30,000+ a month of cash flow to ourselves, which is fantastic as an operator. But then you buy this bigger piece of land or you start running comps on it and you're like, well, now I'm gonna have to structure it with a syndication. And now I'm gonna have to give all this equity away to the LPs, and what is my side left with? I'm not left with very much at all. And I really think that's an important consideration as you're looking at doing a bigger deal, is the deal structure. Because sometimes you do this big deal, it's like, is it worth it? Right? I'm gonna build out this neighborhood. I'm gonna have 2, 3, 4 mansions here. I'm gonna have a project that's $10+ million, and I'm gonna get a tiny little slice of that. But I'm still the operator, right? I'm doing all of this work. I'm running 80 beds. I'm gonna have staff of 60 employees. I'm gonna have so much drama and all this kind of stuff. Is it beneficial for me to just pass on that piece of land and find 1 to 2 acres that I can do this deal on my own? And sometimes, honestly, it is. Sometimes just building these neighborhoods, the juice is not worth the squeeze if you have such a limited equity position and your cash flow is not strong enough that you're doing all of this kind of work. And really, it's a win. It's a great win for all the investors, but it may not be in your best interest. So let's talk about the second consideration with funding is your investor, right? As you're doing a bigger deal, you obviously need to raise more money. So the first thing you need from investors is money, right? The second thing we'll talk about here in a second. But how much money do you need to raise? I've seen $300,000 to $500,000 on doing one mansion. I've seen over $1 million if you're building out a neighborhood, and they're still not even developing the whole thing, but you have so much additional capital going into it for potentially $1 million+ for land and over $1 million for all of the site work. That is all capital you have to put up on the front side. You're not even building those other buildings yet, right? But it's just like, I'm still having this debt ratio and I still have all of this extra capital that I need to raise. So sometimes it just might not be possible. Some people are great at raising money. Some people are not great at it. But if you only have to raise 300 grand, that's pretty easy, honestly. Like, these deals are home run deals and you can do that. But if you have to raise 800,000 or $1 million, and this is your first, experience running an assisted living, that's kind of a hard sell there, right? Who on your team is bringing the experience that you can say, hey, you know what? That person over there, they're doing this, right? Or I'm building that mansion over there, right? Like, that's why we have our partners. They literally fly out their investors and they walk through our mansions and they meet with our managers and say, okay, here's what we're building. This exact building, these exact systems, this is what it looks like. Because it is hard to raise $1 million if you have never done a deal before, right? Like, that just kind of makes sense. So buying this bigger piece of land, doing this bigger deal, it could go to the difference of, I'm raising money from 1 to 2 investors. Now I need to raise money from, 3, 4 investors, or now it puts me in the syndication kind of model. And that totally changes my deal structure. And I just don't have the profit and the equity and cash flow that I wanted anymore. The other thing that you may potentially need investors for is the balance sheet. You definitely need them for money, right? That's why they're there. But sometimes they have to come in and sign on the dotted line. When you go to the bank and they say, hey, you know what, this deal is too big for you, you're gonna personally guarantee, right? Because you're the operator, you're gonna have more than 20%. But your investor partner, regardless of their percentage, we need them to also personally guarantee. And that's where it gets a little sticky there, because a lot of times nobody wants to personally guarantee, right? That means if the project goes horribly wrong and the bank takes it back, they can come after everyone who has guaranteed against their financial statement, right? That's why the bank wants to know, what are your assets, what are your liabilities? And so from that position, you may now have to offer substantially more in equity on the real estate and or on the operations company to cover the difference of the risk that your investor partner has to come up with as they are now personally guaranteeing. You might have this awesome deal structure. If you're going to build one mansion, you're raising 300 grand. You can offer 15% on the equity side of the real estate, and on the operations company, they get an amazing return. They do not have to personally guarantee. But then you find this other piece of land, and it's 6 or 8 acres, and you're going to build out this neighborhood like we're doing, and it's just too big for you. And then you find out after you've already spent a bunch of money going through architect and engineer and all this kind of stuff, and you're committed, that you can't qualify by yourself, and you have to find an investor to sign on this dotted line. And now you went from 15% equity, and now they're saying, hey, you know what? I didn't know I was going to have to be liable for multiple millions, $5 million, $7 million. Like, I'm either not comfortable with that, or now I want substantially more. They want 33, 40, 49%, right? And it's like, man, if I knew I was going to give away almost half the business, I wouldn't have done a deal this size. It would be so much better for me to do just a smaller deal that I can keep all the equity and all of that kind of stuff myself. So there is a give and take here, right? And I do think it's a really important consideration on the front side as you start looking at land. Do I not look for the big projects? Do I just keep my eye on this 1 to 3 acre kind of range? And I know that some of you can do it. Some of you are ready. You have the experience, you have the balance sheet, you have the cash, you are ready to go. You look good to the bank. You may or may not need an investor, but you can do a bigger project, right? And say, go for it, man, right? If you have the experience, if you can fill the beds, sales is really important. If you can fill those beds, then go for it. But honestly, most people, they're not ready for that kind of stuff. And sometimes it's not in your best interest to jump to the bigger deal. You can grow into that, right? You can come back in a couple years after you have built one mansion, you have experience, you have millions of dollars in equity, you have cash flow, your income statement looks great. You can come back and you're super valuable to the banks from that point, right? You're less risky, you are expanding, you're doing another mansion. You can come back and build the neighborhood then. You can build a couple at that point. But sometimes it just might not be worth it for you to be able to do this kind of stuff. And I do want to caution you that when you get into these deals, you start spending money, right? As soon as you get land under contract, you're starting to do inspections and reports and engineering and architectural stuff. Sometimes that's a lot of money. And if you invest this capital and then you find out, you know what, the deal structure changed and I can't get the loan, or I cannot find the investors, or I can find the loan and the investors, but now my equity and cash position is so low that it's like, it wasn't even worth it. It's so important that you consider these things on the front side so you don't risk capital, right? And so that you don't do a deal that is going to, really be too big for you. So if you want to know, how do I do these things, right? I have a free course. It is on our website, assistedlivingmansion.com. It is our funding course, 26 video lessons in there going in detail on funding and SBA and investors and how to give a presentation, all of that kind of stuff. Hit there and then comment below. Let me know what your deal looks like.